Now, I know it's been all but inevitable, but for the first time I can say to you that Brexit is definitely happening. That's because the European Parliament has voted to approve the EU and the UK's withdrawal deal. The vote was 621 to 49, so not at all close. The UK will now definitely leave the European Union at 11 p.m. UK time on Friday. That's midnight in Brussels. As soon as the result was announced, many members of the European Parliament broke into song. So an unlikely rendition of Auld Lang Syne. That's a Scottish folk song, for those of you who don't know it, but most of you will. And of course, it recalls happy days gone by. Now, for a lot of those people singing, the happy days in terms of the UK's relationship with the EU are in the past. Today is not a day that they're celebrating. The same definitely can't be true, said, for the Brexit Party leader, Nigel Farage.
I know you're going to miss us. I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye. And we'll look forward in the future to working with you as sovereign.
If you disobey the rules, you get cut off. Could we please remove the flags?
That was the Parliament's Vice President cutting off Nigel Farage's microphone, and she explained why a little bit afterwards.
The rule in this House is no flags. I'm Irish. I know I'm Irish. I don't need to wave my flag to prove it. And in fact, what was rather sad was that he did what I asked him to do. I asked him to leave the chamber with his flags, and they went outside. I wish they'd listened to the debate, the sadness of many, not just British colleagues, because Nigel Farage has worked for this for 20-odd years, I think he said. He's done nothing else in this House. He hasn't worked as a European MEP. He's worked to destroy Europe. And he's succeeded, but we're not going to let him win. He may have won the war, but we've got a bigger battle to fight.
We also heard from the President of the European Commission.
We will miss you, but we will always keep up our friendship with you, and you can count on us as we know that we can count on you.
Now, I know I've said this a few times, but let's remember the deal that passed today only focuses on the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. The future relationship between the UK and the EU, well, that is all still to come. Let's hear from the BBC's Adam Fleming in Brussels on some of the hurdles that both sides will have to clear.
The EU at the moment is getting their mandate ready, which is the detailed blueprint they'll give to their chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, to then start the negotiations with the UK. I hear they're thinking about 12 negotiating streams that will cover things like trade, security cooperation within the EU, security cooperation in the wider world, scientific research, the mobility of people, a whole load of areas. But the first thing they will have to agree with the UK, and I think they'll probably start talking about in the next couple of weeks, is just how the talks are going to work. Here they call it modalities. They will have to discuss what areas to prioritise, because the EU is not convinced that all the areas that need to be covered can be addressed in the short time available in the transition period. So I think there might be a bit of an argument over what areas are prioritised. There will be a discussion about how intense the negotiations should be, how many rounds there should be, where they should take place, who will be whose opposite number either side of the table. And then the EU, I think, will insist on putting in lots of milestones into the negotiations. For example, getting the UK to sign up to these commitments about fair economic competition, which is badged as the level playing field, and also getting a deal on British waters being open to European fishing boats. Getting those things in place to unlock the negotiations on all the other stuff. And as we learned from the first phase of the Brexit, of the divorce negotiations, all those building blocks for the process and those decisions made at the start can have huge ramifications further down the line.
So that's coming down the track, Adam. Let's look at the immediate term. Friday, is anything going to happen at midnight?
Very little is going to happen here in Brussels. They want it to be an incredibly low-key thing that sort of happens in the legal ether with no cheers or tears. And that is why today at the European Parliament, those scenes you saw, the MEPs linking arms to singing Auld Lang Syne, that's why that was such a big deal, because that felt like the goodbye party for the UK, because all that's going to happen on Friday is we'll get a joint statement from the three presidents of the institutions, Ursula von der Leyen from the Commission, Charles Michel from the European Council, which represents the member states, and the President of the European Parliament. And then at some point just after midnight, the one solitary British flag will be lowered outside the European Parliament and taken to be put in a museum.
And I'll be there to see that flag coming down, because tomorrow, this time tomorrow, we'll be live in Brussels as we build up to Brexit happening, and we'll also be involved in special coverage on the BBC News Channel and BBC World News through Friday evening with the help of Catty Kay and Christian Fraser in London. Now, as I'm sure you know, Brexit has also put Scottish independence right back on the agenda. MPs in the Scottish Parliament today voted 64 to 54 in favour of holding a new referendum on this issue. Bear in mind, there was already a referendum on independence in 2014 and Scottish people voted to stay in the UK. But the argument of the Scottish Government is that Brexit means the circumstances have fundamentally changed since then. Here's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon.
We stand just 2 days away from losing our EU membership and all of the rights that go with it. In my view, it is beyond doubt now that the only realistic way for Scotland to return to the heart of Europe and ensure that we get the governments we vote for is to become an independent country.
But Nicola Sturgeon in the Scottish Parliament does not have the power to call this referendum. That lies with the British government in Westminster, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson has very clearly ruled out granting a new vote. Let's hear from our Scotland correspondent, Lorna Gordon.
It is nonetheless a symbolic debate. It is a significant debate in this ongoing constitutional standoff, and that relationship with the EU is key. Of course, a majority of people who voted here in Scotland voted to remain as part of the EU, and Nicola Sturgeon referenced that relationship with the EU in her opening remarks. Her political opponents have called this a political stunt and a distraction, but it is, as I said earlier, symbolic. It is not likely to lead to anything at this point, but it is another step in this constitutional argument, and Nicola Sturgeon says she will make a speech on Friday setting out the next steps in her campaign to secure another referendum on Scotland's future.